It's amazing.
Well, no, I mean, it's not quite, but I mean,
It's got place the previous.
and they've not been bothered. A lot of people have given up the ones that were on the book. So all the letters on the item here, also me, all of the interest previously.
Yeah.
I think don't get done, but probably.
Okay, thank you, everyone. It's 6 o'clock, so sorry, 7 o'clock. Time to start. Welcome everyone to this meeting of the Audit and Risk Committee. I'm Councillor Julian Spence and I'm chair of this committee. I'm supported by various officers tonight, and before we start, I'd just like them to introduce themselves very briefly. And we're also going to be joined by partners, or they are joined by partners from Grant Thornton, our external auditors. Before we go, just a couple of things. Can I ask, please, those members and officers who wish to speak, to please raise your hand, because there are a number of us here today. And if you're online, please keep your mic on mute when you're not speaking. I think everyone realizes we have a very lengthy agenda, so can I please ask that questions are brief and to the point. Finally, the meeting is being webcast, and if there is an interruption in that cast, we will have to adjourn until the connection is re-established. I hope that won't happen. So before we go on to the agenda, could I just ask the various officers here just to identify themselves, please, name and your area of expertise.
I'm Kimberly Stone, I'm the clerk for this meeting from Democratic Services.
Jane LeGrua, I'm the Deputy Marshal, excuse me, Deputy Borough Solicitor.
Nora Cobbin, I'm the Information Manager.
Linda Frame, I'm IT Manager.
Richard Bates, the Section 151 officer.
So we'll cut off from Grant.
Gail Beaton, Internal Audit Manager.
Robin Taylor, Executive Head of Organisational Development.
And I think we have Rosie online.
Yes, good evening. It's Rosie Playstone, Financial Services Manager. And you may not see her, but one of my colleagues, Katie Baldwin, is also on the line as a learning opportunity.
Thank you, Rosie.
Thank you.
Good, thank you. So on to the agenda. Kim, please, do we have any apologies for absence?
We do, Chairman. We have apologies from Councillor David Beelan, who's unwell.
Thank you. On to item 2, which is the minutes, and I would request the committee approval of the minutes that have been from the meeting held in June and that have been on the council's website.
Agreed.
Thank you. Item 3, disclosure of interests.
Not received prior to the meeting, Chair.
And do we have any at the meeting? None, thank you. Item 4, questions by members of the public.
None, Chairman, and also none from members either.
Thank you very much. So going straight on to item 6, which is the election of a vice chair. And I would seek the committee's approval for the appointment of Councillor Michaela Wicks as our new vice chair.
Agreed.
Thank you. So moving on, if I can say, to the more substantive items. Item 7 is the statement of accounts. And I would like our S151 officer
Or deputy.
or Rosie to outline what we have in the papers.
Of course, thank you, Chair. So what we have in front of you is our statement of accounts for 21-22. So these are the accounts we published July 22. the statutory deadline was in July 22, and we have been undergoing audit by Paul and his team since, I would guess, around October time, and that audit is coming to a close. It's not quite at a close, and I'm sure Paul will explain more in his own report, but we are not quite there. So we are seeking a delegation. We don't anticipate any further large changes to this set of accounts. So we are seeking a delegation for the Chair of Audit Committee and our Section 151 officer, Richard, to approve the statement of accounts once that audit is complete. For some context on that audit, and I'm sure Paul will add more, is we are waiting on I believe just a couple of items now. One of those is the Surrey Pension Fund audit to be completed, and that is due to come to an end in September. And then also we're waiting on an investment confirmation from one of our banks, which we are chasing down, but that will hopefully be a quite quick and easy, nice final task for us to complete, which will be through the bank. So we don't anticipate further changes. So we're presenting this set of accounts for a delegated approval. In the paperwork, you'll also find the AGS and the letter of representation, which we all need signed all together once we are happy to approve the final set of accounts for 21-22. In light of, I know there's not a great deal of time, I just wanted to outline a couple of the changes that were identified through the audit, if possible, which I believe are at Annex 2 from memory. So one of the items we did make a change for was there was a grant from government called ARG, Additional Restrictions Grant, which we had incorrectly categorised into the fees and charges and other income, rather than the government grant income. So there was a small recategorisation of that income. It's £299,000 that we have recategorised in the statements for you. And also we corrected a banding in the remuneration note where we had incorrectly included an officer in a wrong banding. So we've just corrected that banding. But overall, no material changes have been made, but we wanted to make sure that those changes were caught in this hopefully final copy for the board to provide a delegated approval. So I'm happy to take any questions or add any more detail, but I'm conscious time is tight.
Thank you, Rosie. Do members have any questions to raise?
I have a question. So it did jump out the fact that the pension liability hadn't been completed. Will you be able to share that with us before you approve it, so that we can provide any comments that we might have once it's complete?
I see no reason why that shouldn't happen. Rosie, did you hear that question?
Sorry, we need to call some words. It's something about pension liability.
Yeah, so sorry, when the remainder of the audit is complete, could that be shared with us so that we could provide any comments to Julian to approve on our behalf?
Yes, absolutely. We don't anticipate making changes, and I can see Paul popping his hand up, so maybe he can add.
Yeah, I was just going to say, so when I get to the item, I'll explain why this has come about, but you've updated your statements to reflect the requirements of what we've needed to do, and we've done the work. We're waiting just for the Surrey County Pension Funds to provide an assurance letter around specific membership data. So the accounts that you have shouldn't change, so that they are the final. Our audit findings report is based on the work pre that assurance. So we would add another page into this document that will say that we've
the next year essentially, so you're confident.
We'll show the movements between the drops. So you've changed the accounts. So we would reflect that, and if you want, we could put that as an item for information going forward So you have it, but in terms of the actual, I wouldn't expect the accounts to change, which is why they're here today for approval. So
you're saying it's likely to be just a letter of assurance is what we're waiting for?
that's what we're waiting for, yes.
So I would think that if you could just circulate that to the members of the committee.
Yeah.
And if any members have any questions that they want to raise with me before I sign, then please do. I'm correct, this is outside our control.
Yes, the whole thing has been outside of your control. Yes.
Sally and the auditors.
Sorry, just a quick question, Julie. It says to sign off as soon as possible. Does anybody have an idea of how long it's going to take? Are you doing, is it months, years, weeks?
Rosie,
days?
timescale, please.
Yes, so we're waiting on that letter regarding Surrey pension. I know Paul and I caught up briefly last week around this, and the anticipated end date of the Surrey pension audit is September. So we would hope, I guess, maybe a couple of months for some paperwork to catch up, but we would anticipate definitely before Christmas, I would hope. If it was longer than that, we would have probably come to a later meeting.
I mean, I'm hoping September, to be honest. So yeah,
That sounds quite positive.
September or October. Yeah, there's not a substantial amount of work to do. It's just to get the documents.
I was just thinking, as it's dragging on, somebody's got to, at some point, somebody's got to say, come on, guys, let's push this through. Or at least get somebody to do something.
Absolutely.
Well, I would like just to comment that if this is completed in September, it has been a remarkably positive work by both our own finance staff and the external auditors. Because when you look back over the last 2 years, it's dragged on 12 months plus. So I would like to congratulate you both.
Thank you. Any other questions from members? I have one, which is we're invited to confirm that the accounts are based on a going concern basis, and I'm conscious there are a number of pages in papers dealing with that. But given that going concern issues for councils are somewhat in the public eye at the moment, could you just briefly outline the rationale for saying yes, we continue to be a going concern, or point us to the pages that we should be really focused on?
Yes, absolutely, Chairman. So the going concern is around the council continuing to perform its services and continue to be as an organisation in the foreseeable future. So I'm just double checking. So paragraphs 7.10 and 7.11 are the detail behind this. So some of the context here is Waverley is in the position of having a balanced budget in the current year. We have an MTFP for the following 3 years, which does have budget difficulties, and we do have budget gaps, but they're not seen as being insurmountable in the coming years. And we are in a position where we do have reserves to support the council in that time period. Where there are other councils who are suffering difficulties, they will also probably be in the view that they will continue services, but they may be delivered through a different way to their current processes. They will be undertaking reviews, so they probably will continue to be in place and continue to deliver their services, but with reviews undergoing. But Waverley is thankfully in the robust position it is, with a fairly strong financial picture ahead in comparison to other councils that we can see in the news.
Just to add to what Rosie said, I think the key document basically that's produced on an annual basis is the Section 151 Officers Section 25 report, which is alongside your budget. It's approved in February. So that report basically deals with going concern, sets out both the assumptions upon which the budget is based, but also the risks around it and how those are covered and mitigated by the reserves and balances that you have. And ends up basically in a going concern statement, which confirms that the council at that point is regarded by the section 151 as a going concern. So if people want to read that document, actually that will give you, I think, probably a lot of more information about going concern, as opposed to this, the audited accounts, which have got some information in them. But I think the section 25 report is probably the better place to look.
Thank you. Well, I'd like to commend the council for putting us in that position of being robust, because we certainly don't want to be in a position with some of the other councils that we've read about and have had issues. So thank you for that. Any other questions on this? If not, I will then ask the committee to approve the delegation to myself and the S151 officer for the approval of the statement of accounts for the financial year ended 31st March 22.
Agreed.
With one caveat, if I may, is that there are no substantial changes emerged over the intervening weeks.
Absolutely. Yeah. I'm happy for that. Secondly, for the approval of delegation to myself and the Section 151 officer for the approval of the letter of representation, which is in the pack. And thirdly, to confirm that the accounts have been prepared on a going concern basis.
Agreed.
Thank you. Thank you, Rosie. So on to item 8, Paul Tuttle, could I ask you to outline the external audit findings you have in your report, please?
Thank you, Chair. So I'll take the report as read. I wasn't proposing to turn the pages, just to explain that auditing standards require various items to be communicated during the audit. So we had a plan earlier in the cycle, and this report is therefore required to cover various things, including our findings relating to what we consider to be significant audit risks around our independence, around fees, that type of thing. So that's why the document is relatively substantial at 20 pages, even if there's not a lot to say. There is a requirement to cover the various points. So what I would flag for the committee's attention is the fact that our audit is substantially complete, and it has been substantially complete for about 6 months. So there is a national issue, as we've flagged in this report, around pension valuations that has meant that no local government accounts were signed off from March until very recently. So the work had been done. With the report, basically we've been sitting on it waiting for an outcome, or at least a direction on how we were going to close down this final issue around pension valuations. And essentially the action is that we've asked councils to consider an updated report that they received subsequent to the presentation of the draft accounts, and to consider whether the pension position has changed and whether the council needs to change their accounts. And that is what you have done, and that is the thing that we have then subsequently audited, and is what we are waiting for from the county pension fund, just to confirm some information regarding some of the underlying data. So as I said, that should be finalised, and that will allow us to sign the accounts. In terms of the actual audit, it was a while ago, but essentially I think it's fair to say that the draft accounts that were prepared were of a good quality. We received good engagement from the finance team. In this report, we're required to communicate audit differences. So there is an appendix C, which has audit adjustments. I think the thing to dwell on would be the fact that it's 1 page. So, you know, some of these reports that we present, including, you know, relatively close to home, and you might have 15-20 pages. Often with the nature of local government accounts, they are big, they're complicated. There can often be hundreds of adjustments. A lot of them might be incredibly trivial, but we report anything that we consider to be non-trivial, and it's of a relatively low value. So the fact there's one page, I think, is testament to the fact that the draft accounts that you've produced were of a good standard, and the underlying evidence that we were provided with to do the audit was obviously sufficient to allow us to draw the conclusions that we did. So that's all I wanted to say on the report. I didn't want to go too much into detail on the pensions issue. I'm happy to explain it in more detail if that's helpful to the committee.
I think sort of we heard from you earlier, but if anyone else got any additional questions on pensions, but my takeaway is it's largely been outside our control, but we're very hopeful that by the end of September we'll have resolved it.
Yes.
Do we have any questions for Paul on the report? No? Are we asked to approve this or just note it?
Sorry, I've only got the chair switched. So
Let me just-
what was on the beginning of the agenda?
I sense it's just to know.
I think it's
It's
just
just
Just a note, sorry. So I asked the committee to note the contents of the report.
Notice.
Thank you. And again, I'd like to echo Councillor Davison's comments of thanking both Grant Thornton and the Finance Department for the work that they've done in getting us to where we are. It's much appreciated. So on to item 9, which is the value for money report.
Yeah, that's me again.
So, Paul?
Yeah, so again, I'll take this report as read. Probably for context to explain why you have it in front of you and what it is, what's its purpose. So previously, auditors in local government have been required to give an opinion on the financial statements, so true and fair view, but also there was also a section in that audit opinion that you essentially pay for, which was a binary yes, no, is there value for money arrangements. And that changed a couple of years ago, so that the code of practice that directs the auditor's work, it removed that binary yes, no, and it decoupled it from the financial statements audit. So it said instead it wanted auditors to produce commentary across 3 criteria that it established. So this report is therefore the document that is fulfilling that responsibility from the auditor. So we are giving commentary across 3 criteria, so around financial sustainability, around governance, around improving economy, efficiency and effectiveness. So that's why you have the kind of 3 or 4 pages on each. In terms of the auditor's powers, so that is explained in the report as well on page 156 of the document. But essentially, and one of the things that you're seeing increasingly within the sector is the auditor issuing statutory recommendations where they have identified what they consider significant weaknesses or significant issues arising. So the things that we've seen recently, it will be either be around the financial sustainability of an organisation, or that they've faced significant failures of governance or significant failures of investment strategies that has led to significant losses. So the auditor has the power to basically raise those. Also, within this report, then there is something called improvement recommendations, which is just basically other things that when the auditor does the work that they've identified, things that they are recommending that management consider. They can range from really, really minor points like, risk register has scored things wrong to things that would be more significant. There's no kind of rag rating of those. So within the reports, the different ones that we issue will have a range. It depends on the organisation. We've raised recommendation around risk management that you can see on page 164. And due to timing, that's something that's already been implemented. And there's a recommendation around complaints. I would consider those not significant issues. I would say to what I would take from the report if I was the committee would be that, again, it's a positive document, it's a positive assessment of your arrangements in those areas. We're seeing increasingly under that financial sustainability criteria that we're having to raise quite significant and hard messages to councils around their financial sustainability. I think it's fair, as has been reflected already in the meeting, that there are challenges, that there are savings that have to be delivered, and there are pressures from demands of services. But I think the council at the moment is quite well placed to manage those pressures through the kind of the robust processes that has in place around budgeting and around financial management, but also the fact that there is reasonable amount of reserves in place that you would be able to utilise to fund any gaps that you might not be able to cover from saving plans. So in some ways, sometimes it's what these reports don't say is just as significant. So I think that's a bit the reflection that I would make, that there are challenges, but we're quite well placed to face them. So that's all I was going to say on this report. It's just for noting, it's a management report. Obviously it comes to this meeting for stability of the public.
Any questions for Paul or officers? Right, I just picked up Paul on a couple of things. You also the comments on the risk management there. I think, Robin, you're going to be addressing some of that follow-up in your report later on. There were two comments there. One was, I noted, one was talk of a lack of a workforce strategy and a lack of a procurement strategy. So just would invite an officer, if that's possible, just to give us some assurance that those matters are in hand. I'm conscious this is also a value for money report from some while back, but the action is being taken on both those aspects.
Happy Chair to comment on the workforce strategy. That work is underway. Others, I'm sure, will comment on the procurement strategy.
Thank you. Anyone?
So our procurement is now being undertaken through Guildford, through their procurement function. And Adrian Swift, who's the head of that unit, is working on a procurement strategy for both us and separately for Guildford as well. So yes,
Good, thank you very much. We have then in the papers an item 10, we submitted a letter that we've received from the department.
Just note the previous report.
I'm sorry, I thought we had done that. So yes, can I ask you to note the value for money report?
Indeed.
Thank you. Thank you. So moving on to item 10, which was a letter received by the council from the Department of Levelling Up regarding audits. We thought that should be in here to give members update, and I would invite the finance officer just to outline what the letter, or Rosie, I see your hand up, what the implications of this letter and the potential delays are to Waverley, if any.
Thank you, Chairman. This is a letter we've received from central government, and it's around how they wish to deal with the audit delays in the sector. So as part of the news articles we've been reading around local councils, a number of them have had a number of years of accounts not completed their audit. So this letter is beginning to set out how the government wish to deal with that, and it is around effectively allowing audit teams to move on if they are unable to gain the assurance in certain areas to be able to complete their audit. So if they are unable to gain the assurance that they require to sign off an audit in any year, they will be able to declare where their areas of concern or the lack of assurance that they've gained are, and move on with other audits or future years, with a view that that issue will be reviewed by the council, and there is going to be deadlines set where audit teams will move on if they have not gained assurance by that date. So the dates at the moment, I believe, are quite far in advance. It is quite a generous timescale still. However, it does mean that the audit teams like Grant Thornton and Paul's team will be able to move on where they've struggled up until now. So, for example, Waverley, we believe, is going to be low risk. We've cleared our 21-22 audit, hopefully, well, delegated authority today, authority hopefully to sign off in the next month or two. So we will have cleared, and we will have one audit outstanding for the 22-23 year, of which Paul and his team are already booked in to come and do that audit in October. So we are performing well in the timescales. That is thanks to Paul's team and the finance team. We're all keen to keep on top and keep up to date with our accounts and our audit. We personally think that falling behind is making future years harder to complete the accounts and harder to complete the audit. And I think we are all keen to keep up to date. So to date, Waverley we think is low risk, and that is partially down to the dedication of Paul's team as well as our own. Thankfully, we're in a strong position.
Thank you, Rosie. Any questions for Rosie on? Just for information, so nothing for us to prove on that. Moving to item 11, which is the annual information and data management report. I would invite Robin to outline the report and the requests for the Finance Committee.
Okay, thank you, Chair. I'll be brief because I know we are tight for time. I want to start by saying a big thank you to Nora, Linda and other colleagues who've helped to raise the profile of data management at Waverley. Clearly, careful custodianship and control of the data we hold relating to our customers and our community is hugely important. Digitised methods of communication, data collection, storage are becoming more and more prominent and important. We need to ensure we have systems, processes and awareness individually and collectively as an organisation that we ensure we manage the data that we hold and use it with appropriate care. So this report provides insight and information regarding our progress in how we manage data and information. We've learned that this will not ever be a complete task. It is an ongoing task for the organisation. So we need to continue to evolve our systems, check our progress and keep this issue at the forefront of our minds. I'm grateful to the committee for receiving this item this evening, helping us to raise the profile of this important subject. The appointment of Nora into this post as information manager was a key step forward for us on this journey, helping us to shape and improve our approach to information and data management. I'm pleased to see this report, which is the first of its kind, coming into this committee. That's all I want to say by way of an introduction, Chairman, and I know others want to speak.
Any other officer wish to add at this point?
Just before we kind of move on to the report, I just wanted to put it in the context of where we are at in this great kind of world of data processing, because we are not Google, we are not Microsoft, we are not all this big corporation, we are a local authority who collects very specific type of data on our residents, businesses and partners as well. And we use it for our service delivery to better our communities. And although we don't have the same resources, kind of money-wise, and people that we can pull on kind of keeping up with the most kind of recent trends, it doesn't mean that we shouldn't feel kind of inspired by them and aspire to be better in our practices as well, to kind of deliver this customer experience that we are getting accustomed to in the world out there. And behind all of that experience, digital transformation that the council is undergoing sits good quality data. And in order to have that good quality data, we have to put in a lot of good practices, look at the technology, use of the technology, the processes, are our staff skilled enough and supported enough to actually deliver that vision. So this is really kind of more of, putting things in context, and I'm very happy to receive any questions from the members.
Any questions from members of the committee? I, for one, certainly welcome the report, because I think data management is absolutely key now. I think it's a major risk and also a major opportunity if it's handled correctly. We see all sorts of examples of where things have gone wrong with the projects or cyber attacks and so forth. So I think this is a great step forward, and I commend you for it. One minor question or thing that I would ask is that in the report you mentioned quite a lot of different officers who have various titles. Somewhere it'd be helpful if we could actually have a listing of who the individuals are for those different officers. I don't know whether they're the same person with different hats or multiple people. That would just be helpful. That's the top.
I'm not going to ask a question, but as portfolio holder, I would like to endorse the report and say a few words. You mentioned that data is the lifeblood of any organisation, and when managed well, it results in better decisions, greater insight, and the right actions being taken. Managing data as a key asset unlocks its potential and allows it to become the creator of value, rather than just a resource sitting on a server somewhere. So what are the most important areas the IDM is trying to address? Robust governance of the data, a clear strategy, quality first, data architecture, master database, organizational culture. But what are the challenges the council currently faces and that the IDM is attempting to overcome or improve? It needs to change our culture. It needs to improve our skills. It needs to make a business case. And it needs to embed all of this within the organization. Managing the volume and complexity of data within a council is not a simple task. I've been involved in data management for 30 years, and I've never seen anything as complicated as council data. But with our data and information manager, we have with the IDM program, a council-wide approach that will lead to a seamless harnessing of our data and information. I fully support and endorse the program. Thank you, Nora, and thank you, Linda.
Thank you, Councillor. So, I would again endorse what you said, but I would just ask, are you comfortable, as you say, culture and changing the culture is really important. Are you comfortable that at the top, because that's where culture starts, that there is full support behind this, and if you feel there are issues that you should perhaps raise them to the audit committee so that we can then raise them with the respective officers if you have any concerns that you're not getting what you need.
I think in the past year we had a few changes, as you are aware, and there's going to be much more work for us in the autumn and winter as well to engage again with the senior management team now. Everyone's embedded in the posts and also with the managers group at different levels, because there will be different types of engagement we're going to need as well, and different priorities for different groups as well. And so yeah, if there are any issues or any support for the committee, we should come back.
Any additional questions? If not, I shall move. Councillor Davidson.
I'm very pleased with this, don't get me wrong, but it also raises a number of questions in my mind, some of which I suspect may well move into areas which should not be in the public domain. I think what would be helpful, well, certainly to me, but I can do it privately if no one else wants to join me, in having a separate discussion outside, allowing us to be able to look at some of the issues issues which I've got. Perhaps others got different ones, perhaps others don't really agree with mine. To discuss those outside this meeting in a separate forum. If that is agreeable to fellow members of the committee, do you have the time? And if that is the case, you'd like to have something like this, perhaps Kimberly, you could organize a 1 hour session, and would very much appreciate your time.
Chair. Certainly, I have in the past had such a meeting with members of the audit committee, really to go through specific cyber issues which are which are absolutely not for the public domain, and so I'm quite happy to support Nora in such a meeting.
And this report was always aimed as a kind of starting base for the different thoughts and concerns you might have and different reassurances you might need in the future in certain aspects. So I think it's trying to gather all the different things that we're doing across the organization, different roles, and then for you to tell us what are the areas that you're interested in to explore a little bit more, and then we can provide you with some reassurances.
Thank you. Councillor Reed.
I'm just curious as to what you alluded to, for example, the nature of breaches.
Well, not only that, as has already been mentioned, what we're doing about our cyber protection activities, what we're doing about data storage and business resumption associated with that, and some of the processes around the way which we manage our data items. But that's something which is probably going to be a slightly longer discussion. And I don't think it would be totally appropriate at this particular junction to do that.
No, but I agree with you. It should be done privately.
Well, I'm quite happy to have it separately with you, but if no one else is
What are the
interested.
areas that you would like to explore, we can schedule a meeting
The other members think it's a good idea. And I think we could do something that collectively, if maybe Nora could look at diaries and then sort of advise us.
And specifically, if it's related to cyber and backup recovery, business continuity, I need to be part of that meeting. Yeah.
And also some of the processes,
Yes.
which is softer issues around the actual management of data and data entities.
Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Davison. So move to the recommendation, which we note this report, and we pass any comments and observations back to the officers, the senior management team, and the portfolio holder as appropriate. We've got one just now. And to agree to receiving this report annually at the June committee cycle.
Yes.
Agreed.
Thank you very much. So to item 12, which is the covert surveillance policy, and I would like the monitoring officer please to report and outline.
Thank you, Chair. I think I gave myself a promotion at the beginning. I'm the Deputy Borough Solicitor. So item 12 is the review of Great Borough Council's covert investigative powers policy. The committee is asked to adopt the draft policy that appears in Appendix 1. So that starts at page 221 of your papers. This is the policy in relation to the council's exercise of powers under the regulation of Investigative Powers Act. It's what everyone commonly knows as the RIPA policy. In normal circumstances, the council reviews its RIPA policy annually, It was last reviewed by this committee in November last year. It's actually been brought forward a little bit. Not because we had undue concerns about the policy, but because it was seen as an opportunity to align Waverley's policy with Guildford's policy. The policy describes the investigative techniques that local authorities are allowed to use, the circumstances in which they're allowed to use them, the need for authorisation, the need for training, the need for, in fact, some examples are identified in the policy of what exactly would constitute regulated activity and what wouldn't. And finally, the policy seeks to outline the roles and responsibilities of the various officers under the policy to ensure best practice and to ensure a consistency in approach. What I'd like to point out is that the powers and the council's use of the powers under the legislation are unchanged. And the policy just seeks to redraft, reword, and hopefully pick out the best bits of Waverley's policy and the best bits of Guildford's policy and put them into the sort of best purpose document. Within the report, the committee is asked to note that Guildford are adopting or seeking to adopt an identical policy subject to this committee's decision. Just to update the committee chair, Guildford considered this on the 24th of August and they approved adoption of the policy subject to this committee adopting a similar policy. So the recommendation is to adopt the policy, noting that Guildford have adopted a similar policy. Can I clarify, answer any questions?
I just have one, which maybe more of your solicitor hats on. We're being asked to adopt the policy. Am I correct that the Risk and Audit Committee has the power to make it? It's not a recommendation to council?
No, it's within this committee's terms of reference. It's for this committee to adopt.
Thank you. Members, any questions?
It's more of a from a point of information, if I may. How often have we exercised?
Very infrequently. Last used in 2021.
That was my understanding.
Yeah.
So it's something which is a rare occurrence.
Different local authorities use the powers more or less. Waverley use them infrequently, but the importance of having a policy in place, having it reviewed, having it updated, having officers aware of what the policy is, can't be understated, because the real danger is that we're using these techniques and we don't realise we're using them. So it's getting the message out that certain things are regulated.
Thank you.
Any other questions? I just have one, but I'd like to commend you for the clarity of the report, which I thought was excellent. I did feel that when I read it, that some of the social media guidelines for officers are very onerous. They may be absolutely appropriate. I suppose my concern is our members, the officers of the council, are going to be trained and aware of those. Because I think it was like every time you look at a particular website or something, you need to record that and so forth, that we can actually adhere to the policies that are outlined.
Chair, you're absolutely right. They are onerous. The use of social media, and if you pardon me for colloquialising, but for example, checking out people's Facebook to see what they're up to and investigate what people are doing, is one of the key risk areas identified by the Industry Powers Commissioner's Office. And so that is one of the areas that we always get fed back. Make sure that officers and indeed members know that if you repeat visit people's social media, this is tipping into covert surveillance. So the need, I think, to at least keep a log and record of that, and for people to realise that just because it's cyber and not in the real world, it may still be surveillance. I think can't be underestimated, but I completely note it is onerous, and I think it's practically so.
And are you satisfied that the training education of officers is adequate?
From my point of view, I am personally as an officer, I'm extremely new to the council, but this is my practice area from the background. We have mandatory training for all officers as part of their, the online training that all officers have to do and refresh each year. And this is one of the modules. And key officers who are involved in either the investigation of offences or the authorisations or obviously the senior responsible officer, they have far more frequent training that's targeted in their particular role. So one would hope so. The training seems to be in good shape.
Thank you. No other questions? So I would ask the committee to adopt the draft policy that's in Appendix 1. We've heard that it has already been adopted by Guildford, so that it's not a subjectivity. So could I have an approval for that?
See,
Agree.
Thank you. Thank you very much. On to item 13, which is the anti-money laundering report. Again, is that Rosie? For you to just outline what we have here. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So what we have before you is an update to our anti-money laundering policy. So this is a policy we already have in place at Waverley, and we review it annually or as appropriate. Katie, who is on the call, has done that piece of work for us. She has been through the report and updated some links and been checking through the legislation to make sure we have the latest information within the policy. There are a couple of changes that we are recommending. And one of the main ones is that our contact has, we're requesting a change from Peter Vickers to Richard Bates in light of him now being our Section 151 officer. And that is a statutory requirement that we put contacts on our policy. So we have updated that information in our newer copy in the Annex 2, I believe. Oh, sorry, no, Annex 1 is the one with the changes. And also we've added some additional links to information within this policy. Much like the covert surveillance, it is for this audit committee to approve this policy. So if there's any questions or comments, I'm happy to take them. Otherwise, we are requesting approval from the committee to make this updated policy live. And that's everything. Thank you.
Thank you, Rosie. Any questions from members? Inevitably, just one from myself, Rosie. It was more a curiosity. How many AML reports is the council receiving or obtaining each year? And are those reported to one of the ONS committees?
I am not aware of any reports having come through. Gail, are you aware of any? Because I know you're a contact for us.
No, I'm not aware of any reports coming through for money laundering.
Okay, so
Since I've been
it's
here.
very rare. I think it just would be useful in the sort of quarterly performance report if there were a number, not the details of them, just to have an idea of the frequency.
I think it'd be the sort of thing actually we probably, if we had any, we'd actually include in the annual governance statement.
Okay.
Because I feel that would be a good place to actually include that information.
Thank you. So if there are no other questions, can I have a motion to agree the proposed amendments and approve and incorporate these into the new policy?
Agreed.
Thank you, members. Agenda item 14, the update on the financial regulations. I think we're staying with you, Rosie.
Yes, sorry, it's me again. much like our prior policy, we review our financial regulations annually. So these are the rules that we have set out of how we do business, record transactions, mitigate financial risks. You'll see it within the documents. It's quite a few pages, but this is the rules that everyone within the council should be following as their day-to-day role required. So we have done the usual review. Again, Katie within my team has done this review, and we do have some more changes in this document. Let me just place my notes. Apologies. We have gone through the detail and found that actually generally our transactions, our processes, our reporting and recording of information has not required any change. We've not had problems or issues raised that we have found that we've needed changes to this policy and these rules. And actually we've not had any internal audit recommendations that have suggested or proposed that we consider changes to these financial regs, which can be some of the source of where changes are needed, is through that internal audit process would identify weaknesses in our process. But nothing has happened in the last year since we last reviewed this policy. So we're actually suggesting that we don't make many changes to this document as it stands. One of the larger changes that we are proposing is a change to our supplementary estimate limit. So this is a change that we've not made in many years, not in my time at the council. So we are talking at least 12, 13 years. We've not made a change to this financial limit. So the limit currently for executive to approve an additional budget on top of the February council budget is £100,000. And what we are proposing is that is increased to £250,000. So that is in light of the fact that we haven't made a change to this financial limit in many years, and to enable the council to act more quickly and give some more flexibility. This is aided by additional risks around transparency and whether there is additional financial risk. But at the moment, we are of the view that the processes we have in place, the additional reporting that we have through the executive committee, means that we mitigate some of those issues, and flexibility and the ability to take up opportunities is quite limited as it stands. So we're proposing an increase to £250,000 for that one limit within this financial regs. Other than that, there are no other financial limit changes. Although we could consider those, it would require system changes within the council that at the moment we do not have the resource for. So we're putting that on the back burner for now. Any changes to environments would require system changes across many areas. So that is a larger task for us to undertake. Other than that, I do not believe there are any other changes other than some small typographical changes, just to correct some errors we found as we've reviewed the document.
Thank you, Rosie. Members, any questions on this?
Just to add a little bit of context in terms of the discussions that I had with Rosie around the particular item around the supplementary estimates. So I think some of the directors were wanting a higher increase to around £500,000, but I was uncomfortable about that. It meant that most of those items that come through to executive at the moment would not be seen basically in the public. So I thought in terms of transparency that that was too high, and that 250 would actually sort of serve both purposes in terms of removing some of that need for for additional paperwork, but also be transparent for the public as well.
Just a question there. Are we talking about 250,000 for each request or in the aggregate?
This would be each request.
So have you given consideration to having an aggregate number of such supplementary assets? Because that's my concern, is 250,000 is not a small amount. And if that becomes frequent, it's something that I think that the council certainly would wish to be aware of. And I'm not sure how these are reported to council. So that's a question whether if 250,000 is deemed the appropriate individual one, should there be an aggregate cap for these unfunded? Well, it's unfunded, and it's at some point it needs to go back to council. Invite other comments or observations on that.
I don't think we've got anything within the regs that deal with that, but Rosie might correct me.
No, so at the moment we don't have a cap. It is per approval. So at the moment we would have those requests come through to the executive meeting. They would be part of the minuted committee meeting, and therefore once they are approved, the minutes would go through to council. So that would be the reporting through that would continue to happen. Regarding how many we get annually, it depends on the issues that come up. The supplementary estimates we would normally advise that go through would be for issues that have turned up in year. So it depends to a degree what issues have happened. That we have had years where there's been maybe one or two, and then there's been other years where there have been more. Some of those are relatively small, 10, 20, 50,000. So we're not saying that all of our limits would go up to that 250. And examples have been, for example, feasibility on projects, for budgets for testing the feasibility of a project, or if there has been a planning investigation that we've required additional legal support. Those are the regular types of supplementary estimates we have seen come through in recent years.
So Councillor Gale and Councillor.
No, Chris just answered the question.
Chair, I think we have to be mindful of the fact that this council is run on a strong leader and executive, and those people in approving those supplementary estimates will have the best interests of the council in heart. So I don't think we should hog-tie them and say, oh, we're going to have something that's going to reduce the effectiveness of the executive. I think if it ever does become an issue, then we do have the opportunity, when they bring their decisions to the council, to actually comment at that time, or maybe even at this audit committee. But I just feel that those people will make the right decision in the round for the council, and a supplementary estimate to go up to 250,000 when it's been at £100,000 for such a long time seems a sensible approach. So I think we should do that and approve the report.
Councillor Davison.
I agree that we do need to ensure that our officers and executive can function quickly and respond quickly to issues as they arise. But on the other hand, I do feel that we do need to have an element of control in place. And if we have, I can't imagine the circumstance, and I'm sure our leader and executive would probably err it in place. If they do get 5 or 6 or 7 supplementary requests for £300,000 each, I'm sure that they would alert the full council to it. But this is a policy and a guidance for all executives, into the future. But we may have a bad one. So I do believe that there has to be a control, and I believe that something like the S151 officer should be able to keep a track of the aggregate, and we should have a limit on the aggregate total, which would trigger the issue being brought to full council. And what that number is, I am not sure. But from what Rosie has been saying, it happens fairly rarely during the year, and typically they're for small sums, like for council for defending a planning decision. So I'm thinking of something in the order of £1-2 million. I don't know. Possibly, could I ask you to have a look at what probably would be an appropriate level where there might be an adverse impact on our overall budget for the year?
I think, Chairman, I'm just thinking about the route whereby we could report this. So, I mean, obviously, we do quarterly monitoring reports in terms of budget monitoring that go to the executive. So I think within that, I'll talk to Rosie about this when she's back from, supposed to go on holiday, when she's back from leave. Maybe we could just include a paragraph in there that highlights for everybody if those powers have been used, basically in terms of written supplementary estimates. So that way, it's highlighted for everybody.
Yeah,
And if scrutiny then had an issue or whatever, again, it can be picked up through that route as well. So.
And I think, you know, the point is to make it transparent to all the councillors as well as the public as to what we're doing.
Yes.
Okay, so we we'll leave that as is. So I'd like to, the committee recommends the update to the financial regulations to council and to adopt. Agreed. Item 16, we are
15.
15, sorry. Robin, after all that.
Just came in to go home.
Jump to the end. Item 15, Robin, could you like to update us on the risk management process and the presentation there? Could you also, in your remarks, address some concerns that have been raised by other councillors regarding, I call it staff retention as a risk to the council and how that is managed. I'm not asking you to go into the details that triggered the request. Those I think have been dealt with in one of the ONS committees. But I think from a risk management perspective, we want to get some assurance that the processes for managing staff retention and departures is robust.
Okay. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you.
Good evening, members. Thank you for giving me some time on the agenda this evening to talk through risk management at Waverley Borough Council. Just to introduce myself, I'm Robin Taylor, Executive Head of Organisational Development. Obviously, we have a structure in place since October last year, which hopefully you'll be familiar with now, but as a reminder, organisational development covers strategy, policy and performance, business transformation, climate reduction, human resources, programme and project management and assurance, and finally, risk management and business continuity. And I'll say the same things I did at the overview and scrutiny presentation, which is just to remind members around the table that that is a list of functions, not necessarily a list of teams. And obviously one of the jobs for all members of the joint management team is to make sure that we can deliver those functions. But it doesn't necessarily mean at the moment we have an entire team for each of those functions listed. So that's part of the job that we're doing at the moment. Risk management under the previous structure was looked after under finance and resources. So it is a shift, it's a positive shift to have it looked after under organisational development because it recognises that risk management isn't just a financial matter, it's heavily linked to the question of financial management, but we also look through the lens of legal risk, reputational risk, safety risk, etc., etc. And you'll see that in my presentation. So at the chairman's request, I'm just going to have a very brief run through of the council's current approach to the risk management framework. Happy to take any questions either as we go or at the end. It's intended to be a brief run through. It's intended to give you, as committee members, a sense of where we are, but also importantly, where we need to improve on some areas in line with an internal audit report that we've had. So I'll pick up if that's okay, Chairman. So what I'll cover is risk management, a reminder of what it is and why we do it, my own red, amber, green overview of our risk management framework, the components within it, and which of those are just fine, which need a little bit of work, and which need to be looked at from a blank page. I'll remind us of our annual governance statement and what that says about risk management, quick summary of the policy and toolkit. I'll alight on the strategic risk register, and some of you will be very familiar with risk registers and how they work, but some of you won't be. So I'll just work through the types of information that risk register includes. Talk a little bit about risk in terms of impact and likelihood, look at the council's existing appetite statement, talk through the recommendations from the internal audit recommendations, and then there's an opportunity for Q&A, and I think, Chairman, that's where we can best pick up this question of recruitment and retention that you mentioned just a moment ago. So risk management, what and why? So that generic definition there, the forecasting and evaluation of financial risks together with the identification of procedures to avoid or minimise their impact. Well, that covers some of it, but actually sometimes within our risk management approach, yes, sometimes we need to avoid a risk, sometimes we need to minimise it, sometimes we need to accept it. And a legitimate risk management treatment may be to accept the risk and to tolerate it. I'll pick that up in a moment. So from our own risk management policy, the council defines risk as the probability that something might happen that could have an effect upon the council. So pretty broad in terms of that definition. Risk management, the process by, slide, the definition of risk management there. So it's about adding value to our activities. I've also put a screenshot of our annual governance, the page from our annual governance statement there to remind us that risk management alongside performance management is actually seen as a key part of our overall approach at the council to corporate governance. So it doesn't sit on its own. That's clearly why it reports through this committee, because it is part of our corporate governance. So that's my view on, as a professional officer, in terms of what the components of our risk management framework need to be. And that's just my own view of the red, amber, green rating of where we are at the moment. So we have our risk management strategy, strategic risk register and agreed matrix, the statement of principle and public commentary on key risks in the annual governance statement, individual project and programme risk registers, risk appetite statement, risk policy and toolkit, risk management budget and staff, and training and development. As I say, there are recommendations within our Southern Internal Audit Partnership report from a few months back, which tell us where we need to improve here. But as you can see, my own view is that we are exactly where we need to be in terms of what our annual governance statement says. We are not where we need to be in terms of having a risk management strategy in place, nor in terms of having the right level of staff in to support us, and everything else. We've got a good baseline, but we need to revise, tweak, and improve. Okay, so principle number 6 of our annual governance statement talks about managing risks and performance through robust internal control and strong public financial management. And so I won't read everything that it says on there, but just to give you that assurance, as indeed the internal auditors did, that we are making the public statements that we need to around risk management. We have a policy toolkit agreed a number of years ago, 2-3 years ago, and that policy and toolkit contains the risk management policy. It contains our process that we advise the council undertakes, that we go through. And as you would expect for risk management, like performance management, that's a cyclical process. So, it tells us that we need to identify risks, to analyse them, to prioritise them, make sure we manage them, and then make sure that we monitor the extent to which they remain risks after we've applied the mitigation measures. And then it's pretty much a case of rinse and repeat. When you get to the end of that process, you go back to the start and do it all over again. The policy and toolkit contains roles and responsibilities. It sets out clearly who is responsible at the council for our risk management framework it needs updating, not least of all because it refers to the pre-restructure roles and responsibilities, including the previous head of finance's role with risk, which has obviously changed. It also refers to previous committee structures, so that definitely needs a review. The remainder of that policy and toolkit really sets out the nuts and bolts stuff that we use as committees and as officers to manage our approach to risk, and it also contains our risk appetite statement. Okay, I'm not expecting you to be able to read that, I'm pleased to hear. So I'm going to go through the columns. So this is a screenshot of our strategic risk register. So that's really at the heart of our approach to risk management. So the first thing we look at in each case is what our corporate strategy priority is. So every risk that we identify and measure links back to our corporate strategy and which of the priorities, in there we think it relates to. Similarly, then which of the corporate strategy objectives it relates to, just to get a bit more specific. We number our risks so we can keep track of them. The first thing is to give it a description. So if something happens, to describe what the risk looks like. And then we have a consequence description. So if something happens, then this is the issue that we face. These are the consequences. We then list the current control measures that are in place, set about in place as a result of our risk management framework. These are the control measures that we are putting in place to try and mitigate the risk to whatever extent we can, in whatever way we decided as a council is the right way to do it. We have an officer owner of that risk. We have a record of whether we will treat risk or tolerate it. In the main, we will treat these risks. There will be occasions where we will have to accept, or we will choose to accept, that we're going to tolerate a risk, but that's less usual. Because it's a working document, we then have a column where we set out further actions to mitigate the risk appetite, so where we identify that other things are needed to help us move towards the level of risk appetite that we're satisfied with. That should say expected completion date, although data is also good. And then we set out what is the current risk profile. So what is the level of impact that this risk would bring, and what is the current likelihood? And how does that compare with our target risk rating? What do we want it to be in terms of impact and likelihood? And obviously, although you can treat the impact of a risk, often what we're working on is trying to reduce the likelihood of it happening. You can also treat the impact if it does happen. So just to dig into that a little bit more then, this is how we measure impact in terms of our risk management. We look at it in terms of our impact on the council's finances, on its legal and regulatory adherence, health and safety, whether or not we're able to deliver our services, and what the reputation damage to the council might be of any given risk. And then we look at the impact in terms of whether it's a small risk, a significant risk, a critical risk, or a devastating risk in terms of the impact. And those are quantified to some degree against each of those elements within the risk indicators. So in terms of financial, for example, we say that devastating risk is beyond £100,000. Not sure whether that might need to be reviewed, but that's what our risk framework says at the moment. In terms of likelihood, then, we score that too on a scoring of 1 to 6, from almost impossible to very high, and all the way through those descriptors. And one way of looking at that is, what is the percentage chance of this happening? Sometimes that's an easy way of looking at it. We also describe it in prose, so only likely to happen once or in 3 or more years, or inevitable it will happen within the 6 months at the other end of the scale. What we do then as a council, and I say we collectively, because this is a job for officers and for councillors within this committee and the executive, is we review the impact against the likelihood. Clearly, where you have the highest level of impact, devastating, and the highest level of likelihood, very high, you've got a red risk. At the other end of the scale, a small impact that's almost impossible to happen, clearly it's green. And then obviously in between, you've got green, amber and red, depending on the combinations of those impact and likelihood scores. This is the council's current risk statement. So what you've got there is the various different risk appetites that we might take, all the way from risk averse to being cautious, to being moderate, to being open. This is where, following the previous exercise involving executive members, the previous audit committee, and the previous senior management team, this is where we landed. So you won't be surprised that on the issue of safety, the decision was taken, for example, that we would take an entirely risk-averse risk appetite. But on some of the other lenses that we look through, some other types of risk, either cautious or moderate. Now, again, when I look at these, I'm not sure I agree with, not necessarily from my own point of view, I'm not convinced that those yellow boxes really represent where the council is today. They may do. Either way, I think the time's come for us to have a review of that. And that's something that I'd like to do in conjunction with this committee. Happy to hear comments on that this evening, but I think it's also a piece of work that we can look at in more detail later. So just to give you a very simple worked example, within our strategic risk register for the council, number 27 relates to business continuity, and that states that there is a risk that if robust business continuity measures are not in place, then the council will not be able to deliver its services in the event of future emergencies. It then lists our current control measures, production of business continuity plans, and a specific IT infrastructure upgrade that took place in 2021 to provide additional robustness. It asks us whether we treat or tolerate that risk. It says that we treat it. The target likelihood is very low, and the current impact is significant, and our current impact and likelihood matches that exactly. To just give you one example out of the risk register of how that looks in practice. We received an internal audit report in March of this year. Thank you very much to Gail for supporting with that process. We received a limited assurance opinion. You can see that's marked amber there. So that means significant gaps, weaknesses, or non-compliance were identified. Improvement is required to the system of governance, risk management, and control to effectively manage risks to the achievement of objectives in the area audited. So you'll probably be aware of that because it's contained within the internal audit information that you track as a committee anyway, but just as a reminder that that is there. For me, this is the key way and the key area of focus for me around risk management, because it is our internal auditor's opinion on what I need to do to lead change around risk management. And it's not telling me it's absolutely broken, and it's not telling me that it's absolutely fine. It's somewhere in the middle. It's telling me that there's some work to do on this, and that's very helpful to get that opinion from the internal auditor. There are 4 actions dotted through the report. The first is they recommend that we review the current risk management policy and toolkit and ask whether or not this and the arrangement put in place to deliver it could be shared or harmonised with Guildford Borough Council. That's clearly a good question for me, because I'm responsible for risk management in both authorities, and yet I have different risk management arrangements and staffing in place in the 2 councils. So that's the first, to review the existing risk management policy and toolkit. The second is to develop and agree a risk management strategy, where we does not currently have a risk management strategy, at least not a document that says risk management strategy on it. I would probably argue we do have a strategy for dealing with risk, but we haven't specifically set that out in one document. Again, could it be shared or harmonised with Guildford Borough Council? To confirm staff resource to support risk management at Waverley following the departure of the risk insurance officer in June 2022. So very important but practical challenge for me is to make sure that under the new structure, that we make sure that the work done by that previous officer is replicated in the new structure. And that's something I'm working through at the moment. My approach to that will be to locate it within the strategy and performance teams, because that's where it sits under our new structure, and I need to allocate that work. I'm making it work on a day-to-day basis with the support of my team, but we need to formalise that within the structure. And finally, to look with our HR team and our learning development officer, what risk management training we should be providing to staff as part of their induction to the council, but also on an ongoing basis with the Surrey Learn Partnership. So hopefully you can see in the past few slides that quite a few of the reds and ambers that we have in terms of my own RAG rating are squarely picked up by the internal audit report. My intention is to meet the requirements set out in that internal audit report to deliver those actions by the end of the financial year, and in doing so, make sure that we sort of shore up our approach to risk management. And that's the end of my presentation, Chair, and I'm happy to have the conversation on the back of it.
Thank you very much, Robin. I'll open it to questions or comments by members.
Well, no one else will ask a question. Well, I've been to the whole risk management exercise in the past. I think you're quite right in identifying some of the weaknesses or failures picked up. I think one of the observations, and I believe this will be the case, that the executive would like to take a much more active role in assessing the risk management, the strategic risk management. Is that your understanding, Robin?
I mean, they already do by our risk policy and toolkit have a key role to play. I think part of what slipped in the past year or so has been the regular review of the risk management framework. That needs to happen, and it needs to go back through this committee and the executive. When I mentioned the risk appetite statement earlier, I don't see anything wrong with the way that was reviewed in the past. It was reviewed with input from the senior management team, this committee, the executive. I think we need to do that again to refresh it in light of changing times.
Yeah, thank you.
I could add a couple of comments on that. I think absolutely key that the executive and the senior management team are fully embedded in this, because again, it comes from the top, the culture of risk, and that's honest challenging of the assumptions that picked up, not adversarial, but saying honest, challenging, and then I think you get to a collective good decision. So I think very important that as you develop, that the senior management and the executive are very much visible and on board with that. I think, yes, you've got your honour voyage. I took there that really by the end of the year, financial year, we should be, many of these things should be in place. A number of them, I think you said that the Audit and Risk Committee are invited to be there. So again, I think one of the next stages, once you develop these, is to maybe have another out of committee cycle, off-site, if you like, meeting with us where we can go into specifics of the risk register and the risk appetite. There. A couple of other just broad observations that I would make is the risk register appears to me quite siloed. One of the concerns I have is where you might get 2 or 3 correlated risks, each of which are quite small, but when they come together, create something much larger. I'm not quite sure how you handle, but I'd like you to consider that, how you can adapt some sort of correlation approach to which risks might impact another, and how that might escalate into something that we could all be over. And the other sort of thing I would suggest to you is having some form of learning exercise. You'll get near misses, you'll have incidents. So keeping a log of where there are items that have failed in the risk management, failed in a strong way, near misses, that will enable you to then develop strategies to mitigate against it. So a useful log, then you'll see let these things happen. A lot of the departments will already have this, I'm sure. Finance will have lots of controls over financial reporting and so forth, but just for them. So those are just some of the observations, but I think you're on the right track, and giving us the chance to take our voice. So that's my 2 pennies worth. Councillor.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think you've identified some good areas to improve. Just had a couple of questions. So, do you have an incident log, an incident management framework at the moment for where those risks crystallise?
Yeah, so that's where there's an overlap with the risk management and business continuity, which is exactly why under the new structure those sit in my area. So to pick up on your point, Chairman, where we've had near misses, then we have a lessons learned review of those. I'm not sure that it's set out anywhere that we should or we must, but we do. So that's the sort of thing that we should formalise within our strategy, I think. So, for example, recently the joint management team reviewed an incident that took place in terms of some IT hardware that didn't fail, but we could see that in certain circumstances it could. That was not within this authority, but within a different authority. But it's that type of thing that we should look at. You look at where things nearly go wrong, and you make sure you learn from them so that you don't get to them going wrong in the future. And one of the good things about the collaboration is it provides us with the opportunity to have resilience between the two organisations as well. So that's something we're also looking at. You mentioned the risk of being siloed. And I think one thing we can pick up in the risk management strategy is, again, we have this in place, but we don't have it formalised, to make sure that we're very clear about what goes in the corporate risk register, what goes in service risk registers, and what goes in project and programme registers, how they interact, and then how we embed that stuff into corporate decision making, our budget planning, and our project management. So it's just making sure that we're clear with the public and with ourselves how we're doing that stuff.
Sounds thank you. And so you obviously cover a lot of functions, it sounds like. Is it ultimately your goal to have a dedicated risk team who would be dealing with the risk management, or would it be kind of part of it?
I don't think it's realistic to have a risk team. I think it's far more realistic that I will have an officer within the policy and strategy and performance function, specialising in risk. I actually don't want it just to be in one place anyway, so there's likely to be an officer lead, but as mentioned before, it's something which the whole of the joint management team needs to own at a senior level. But no, we'd like to have a risk management team. I don't think the resources to do that.
Okay, just one quite specific question. How did you determine the impact? Is that a percentage of budget, percentage of revenue, or how did you determine those pound sums?
Oh, I see. Well, I mean, that was a judgment call taken at the time. And I think possibly it's looking a bit dated. Clearly, we've just been talking about the thresholds for executive decision making. That's gone up from 100 to 250,000. I'm not saying that part of the risk matrix would automatically go up from 100 to 250,000, but it's a reminder that things don't stay the same. We probably need to review all of that. I wasn't as involved in it at that point, so there may be others who know exactly how that figure was reached, but I think the process by which they went through is the process we need to go through again to review that figure.
Thank you. Look forward to seeing the work.
I would be absolutely dead against having a risk team. It takes away the responsibility from a risk from the management and the line.
I think, Chair, there's a balance to be struck from having some level of resource.
Well, a lead maybe, but that's as far as you go.
Yeah, I certainly concur with you. I often use the image of everyone is a risk manager.
Absolutely, yeah.
Ownership is key. So yeah, you don't want to isolate it, but you do need somebody who's going to direct it and if necessarily push when pushing is needed. And I guess that's going to be you. We'll certainly look to you for that leadership. Well, thank you very much. I don't hear any other questions, but I would ask is that I think we're going to have risk management. It's going to be on a standing agenda item on this committee. is for you to come back at each point to basically initially reporting on your progress to these goals, but also as it develops into so perhaps more detail. You might see some deep dives in particular of items of risk that the committee might feel evolve over time.
And in terms, Chair, of the recruitment and retention risk, I think that when we review the strategic risk register, that will need to feature. It features within specific programme and project risk registers at the moment. It doesn't feature exactly in the way that I would expect it to in the strategic risk register. One of the key mitigating actions is to develop that workforce strategy and all that sits underneath that. But that is certainly something which the council needs to pay attention to.
If you can be urging your colleagues to address that, be grateful. I'm sure the rest of the committee will as well. Thank you very much. Moving on to the next agenda item, which is the annual governance statement. And here I believe we are being asked to just consider whether there are any issues that we need to put in. We're not here being asked to approve that statement.
No, because I believe that it's an ongoing, and we haven't actually had the end of year annual governance statement. It's just there for information. And is there any issues that the members wish to?
So members will have an opportunity not only to read the proposed one, but also earlier on to the current one is. Sorry, Rosie.
Sorry, I just wanted to confirm, actually Kimberly covered that brilliantly. This is a standing item that we bring back every audit committee for the audit committee just to review, confirm if they have any governance issues, concerns that they want recorded. And this will come through as part of our accounts and be signed by Tom as chief executive and the leader. When appropriate, it will be as at when the accounts are being signed off or that period. So we're not looking for a sign off today. We're looking for any identified concerns for the 22-23 and 23-24 year.
Thank you for that clarification. I had just a couple of points, if you could indulge me on that. Was whether this report should reference changes to the planning committee from 2 to 1. I posit that as a question. We've heard today about the progress being made on data management, data security policies and strategy. I kind of think that should be listed in this report because I think that's a major issue. And in terms of operational events, we've obviously had the threat of designation for the planning. And I think that should perhaps be addressed in the statement. Likewise, but not at the same level, an update on the executive working groups, which I think have changed somewhat since last year. So those are just my few points.
On the changes to planning, though, I believe that's all going to be reviewed at a certain point, isn't it? The changes that have been put in place now. There's a review for that.
It is. I just
I just wondered whether we put it in here now or whether we wait till it's reviewed and then take it forward, or put it in as something that's happening to be reviewed.
Take guidance from officers. I'm merely making suggestions. People consider that whether it's appropriate to have that in there, because you're right, it may get reversed. Anyone else have any observations at this time? No, but if you do, Rosie, if we have offline or other considerations, we address them to you.
Yes, please do, and I will consider all the issues you've raised tonight and include them in the future copy. So this will come back round at the next audit committee for you to review again.
Thank you very much, Rosie.
Thank you very much.
Now I'm going to turn to Gail for item 17, review of the progress in achieving the audit plan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, you'll see there's not really much to introduce in the covering report. Obviously, I'm just asking the committee to note the progress that has been made. But as you will see from the context of the appendix 1, that the progress in this year's plan is a bit slower than what I would expect. But hitting on the information that Paul had conveyed earlier, I think our contractor themselves have been suffering from staff changes, turnaround. I think everyone is, and so they are a little bit behind. But we are hoping now that summer holidays are over and that people are more available to respond to their requests as well, because obviously that's the difficulty that we are having on our side. Because obviously we have an annual leave finishes at the end of September. So with the summer months, sometimes it's very difficult to actually hold to the person that you really need to speak to. So as I say, what I will point out to you, we talked, Robin Taylor talked to everyone about business continuity. Linda talked to everyone about updates in IT that we're making. And we are in the process of obviously bolstering the business continuity and recovery. And again, they may have the issue regarding having a specialist contractor available to do this. And it's now felt that the work that contractor's having to do will not be done until December. So therefore, you'll see in the page, page 420 at the top of there regarding the rolling work programme, you'll see that that item is now being deferred to the first quarter of next year, because the time that the systems are put in, we won't be able to test it until already then. So I'm hoping we can do that in favour.
So that's a practical, because the practical reasons rather than any diminution in the importance.
Yes, that's right. As I say, the amount that we've invested in this particular project will obviously give us safeguards that basically we have a process and a system in place that we can make sure that we can recover more speedily than what we possibly could now. And we actually have it be an off-site storage, etc. So trying not to make too much information, because obviously if we have items later on comes up which are then exempt for the reason related to IT security as well. And as I say, you can see there's progress being made regarding the plan. The contractor is firing on, shall we say, with the reviews that they have been allocated to them. And as you can see there on page 424, as I said, included the adjustments to the plan. You can see I've taken the 10 days that we've allocated for business continuity. So that will then also reduce the number of days allocated to the contractor for this year. But also we had 2 increases, one regarding procurement and another one regarding car parking PCNs. And now this was a review that the executive head of service for Guildford and Waverley. He was having this review done at Guildford, and I'd also highlighted it for the review here at Waverley. But to provide consistency regarding the testing that was done, there needed to be an extra 3 days added on. It hasn't been detrimental to our budget because obviously we've already cut 10 days out for the IT one. So therefore at the moment we're still within budget regarding the resources we've got available. Sorry, can I sit through that?
Any questions? None. So we'll move on to item 19, which is the current annual work project.
Sorry, progress.
Sorry.
Do we accept the recommendation?
I'm sorry, I was reading the wrong.
You're ahead of yourself, are you?
Yes, yeah, so I'd like a motion to note the contents of the internal report as a
Noted.
Agreed.
Agreed. Apologies for that. I was getting ahead of myself. So on to item 18, which is the review of the progress of the current internal audit actions.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. As you can see from Appendix 1, we have the introduction of the team. Chairman requested the last audit committee, which provides an overview for the audit committee of those particular actions where an extension has been requested. And for Appendix 1, we have 3 recommendations asking for an extension, and these relate to housing review that was done on use and occupation. The Executive Head of Service has asked for an extension for 2 recommendations to 30th of September and another recommendation covering the same topic to the 30th of October. And you can see in the body of the report, those particular reviews are, or the actual actions, more detail of those actions are on page 436 and 437 and 438.
Does any members have any questions regarding those 2 extension requests to be perfectly reasonable, things are progressing, but just have not anticipated. Any other questions on any of the other items in Appendix 1?
And again, there is a summary of those particular action of the joint executive head in Appendix 2, providing justification for those requests for an extension.
Thank you. I think we agree those 2 extensions. Thank you very much.
Now, the next item is an exec item.
I suggest, Chairman, that we maybe look at item 19 and then go into exempt session so that the Zoom recording doesn't have to be stopped and restarted just for one item.
I think that makes perfect sense.
Thank you, Chair.
So let's jump to item 19, which is the current annual work programme.
Thank you, Chair. So as members will see, the annual work programme has been added for your information. As you were aware, it's a rolling programme and we just make adjustments as and when necessary should there be items that need to either come early or be slipped to the next meeting. At the moment, I'm not aware of any adjustments that are needed. So therefore, the items set out for November at this precise moment are the ones that we'll be discussing.
Anyone have any questions on that?
If something cropped up that you wanted to put on to say the November agenda, how much notice would one need to give?
Just literally just as soon as you would like it on there so that we can make sure the officer has time to.
Yeah, I just wondered if there was a cut-off or anything.
I mean, ideally, no, not we. Yeah, before the chairman's briefing so that we can raise it with the chairman, which is usually, shall we say a month before?
2 weeks.
Because it's 2 weeks, because it's 2 weeks before for the actual agenda gets published, sort of 2 weeks before. And then our chairman's briefing is usually about a week to 2 weeks before that. So if we say a month before the meeting, that's about right.
Yeah, okay. Thank you.
I've also said if you have any items that or issues that you think you'd like to raise, engage with me as
Absolutely,
as soon as you want to. And we'll
Obviously, the longer the better.
Thank you, Chair.
So we will note that.
Thank you, Chairman. I will now close the recordings so that we can discuss appendix 3.
Thank you. Thank you all those who have been on the recording. Thank you, Rosie, for your time.